Okay, chapter 48 is about neurons and synapses. Okay, so the main idea here is that the neuron, the nerve cell, is going to transmit messages and then synapse with other cells, other neurons, and modulate or transmit the message from one part of the body to the next, and then really kind of be responsible for helping to integrate a response to the stimulus. Okay, so nerve systems, this is where you have a neuron, which we said was a nerve cell, and it's going to transmit the electrical impulses in the form of like an action potential. And there's about 100 billion of them in the brain, so you can see that there's a lot of nerve cells that are responsible for integrating all the fine movements that we have in our body. And all animals have some sort of a nervous system, with the exception of sponges. Okay, and the only thing that's really different about them is the organization that they have. There's some animals like the hydra that have a very diffuse nerve net that's really just involved in kind of communicating, but there isn't really much organization there. It's just taking information in from the surroundings and kind of coordinating a response. And then other animals, such as ourselves, have a highly organized nerve system. Okay, so some of the supporting cells within the nerve system help really kind of maintain the function that it has. And the two that are important for us are Schwann cells and oligodendrocytes. And these are responsible for myelinating the nerve cells, which is going to aid in the speed of signal transduction from one spot to the other. So the Schwann cells are the type of cell in the peripheral nervous system that's responsible for wrapping a myelin sheath around them. And then in between each of the nodes all along the axon here, you see these various, get my pencil up here, you see these various little spots where really there's no myelination right there, there, and so forth. Those are called nodes of Ranvier. So you can see here in this blown up version, here's a Schwann cell, here's a Schwann cell, and then in between there is kind of the neuron that's exposed, and that's the node of Ranvier. Okay, and that, as you'll see when we go into other portions of this lecture here, you'll see that that's responsible for the saltatory, or the very rapid kind of jumping conduction. Okay, so oligodendrocytes basically do the same thing that the Schwann cells do, but they do it for the central nervous system, the brain and the spinal cord. So these are going to be responsible for wrapping a myelin sheath around the axons in the central nervous system. Okay, and again, this is going to aid in the speed of conduction. So a nerve basically is a bundle of neurons wrapped around connective tissue, and that's going to transfer information about the environment from the periphery, or the peripheral nervous system, to the central nervous system, and then from the central nervous system, the coordinated response back to the peripheral nervous system. It's going to do so by means of like electrical signals or action potentials. And the information gets transmitted from really the dendrites, which is receiving the information through the cell body, and then along the axon, and it's either going to synapse with other nerves or it's going to synapse with muscle cells. Okay. And the two organelles really that are responsible for the neuron, these are the kind of the extensions really of the cell body. These are the axons, these are the longer portions. So if we look here, this would be the axon, the long portion of the neuron. And then over here, all of these things here are going to be the dendrites. These are from dendron, or a tree, and these are highly branched and they receive lots of signals. So the axons can really synapse with other dendrites or with the cell bodies of the organs, the cell bodies of the other neurons. And then the axon is really going to be responsible for transmitting that information that it receives to either a coordinated response or to other cells. Okay. So near the end, we have the axon terminal, and largely what this is going to do is it's going to synapse with the cell body of another neuron. Sometimes, occasionally, it's going to synapse kind of on these dendrites here. But you can see in this electron micrograph, there's lots of spots where these axon terminals are fusing with, or synapsing with, I guess would be a better term, synapsing with the cell body of the other neurons, okay, to kind of coordinate the response. So as far as the nerve transmission goes, when you get this signal that transfers down the axon, and we're going to go into this in more detail, at this axon terminal here, through exocytosis, you're going to release some neurotransmitters, and these neurotransmitters are responsible for really the change that you see in the postsynaptic cell, and it's largely going to be responsible with binding to these ion channels in the postsynaptic cells, opening them up, closing them down, allowing the nerve transmission to transfer from what is known as the presynaptic cell, which would be right here, to the postsynaptic cell, which is right here, okay? And the transmission of that information from the presynaptic neuron to the postsynaptic neuron is what's responsible for getting the action potential from the presynaptic neuron, again, to the postsynaptic neuron, okay? So when the organism receives this information from the outside, this stimulus from the outside, this information must be coordinated quickly so that you can have an appropriate response to whatever that stimulus is, either getting out of the way, getting your hand off of the hot object, or whatever it may be. And it's really the response is accomplished through that action potential, which is really synapsing with a whole bunch of other neurons, and sometimes up to, as you see here, 100,000. So that's what allows us to coordinate a lot of really like integrated responses, really fine-tuned responses to the stimuli that we're receiving. Okay, so in the next lesson, we're going to talk about the resting membrane potential and how that's responsible for the generation of an action potential. Okay, so if you have any questions, of course, make sure you write them down like we always say, and we'll talk to you soon.